So I'm looking for confirmation present of Councillor Salee, verbally, if not by picture, and Councillor Van Meerbergen, please. Okay, that leaves Councillor Salee.
Apologies, Mayor, I'm present.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Councillor. All right, colleagues, and to the public, welcome to the 12th meeting of City Council, a virtual meeting held during the COVID-19 emergency. We'd invite you to check the city's website for current details of the COVID-19 service impacts. Meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the city's website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. Now, to make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Colleagues, I'll look for any disclosures, please, of pecuniary interest. I see Deputy Mayor Morgan. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. On the Civic Works Committee, agenda item number 19, which is item 2.15 in the committee reports related to the South London Air Monitoring Network, I'll declare an interest on that as part of the project flows funding to my employer, Western University.
Thank you. Any other items to be dealt with separately based on pecuniary interest? All right, thank you. I see none. Colleagues, under the recognitions, we have two particular categories, and I'm going to stand to recognize the individuals, if you'd allow me, please. The first that I'm going to recognize, and it's my honor on behalf of London City Council, to recognize 5 exceptionally brilliant young Londoners as recipients of the 2021 Queen Elizabeth Scholarship. The $2,000 scholarship awarded annually normally recognizes 2 high school students with the highest scholastic achievement based on the average of the students' best 6 subjects in their graduating year. This year, however, 4 students shared identical top marks, resulting in 5 high school students being recognized for their exceptional academic achievements, and Council determined that all were deserving of the $2,000 scholarship. So we are delighted to acknowledge that right now. I will share with you that we have 3 individuals present through Zoom, I believe, in one of our meeting rooms, and who will make a few comments in a moment. But first, let me start by acknowledging that the 4 graduating students, each with an average of 99.5%, unbelievable. Anne Lungio, who is a graduate from London Central Secondary, now attending the University of Toronto Life Sciences program as of this fall. And in a few moments, we'll ask her to speak. The second is Caitlin Pringle, a graduate from H.B. Beale Secondary School, now attending the university to pursue her goal of becoming a secondary school teacher. And we'll speak a little later. The third is Mia Sherba, another graduate from Beale, now attending Western for Business Management and Organizational Studies. She'll be our third speaker tonight. And Nadine Chevalier, who is an Oak Ridge Secondary School graduate, now attending Western for Engineering. Now, as I've indicated, all 4 of these incredible Londoners graduated with a final year average of 99.5%. So what I'm going to do, if I might, is I'm going to invite first Anne Lungio to make a few comments, if you please would. Anne Lung, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Anne. This is a very big moment for me, and I am so honored to be invited here. First of all, I'd like to thank the City of London for your generosity in presenting this award. Next, I'd like to thank my home school, London Central Secondary School, for a wonderful 4 years of learning. Central taught me how to push myself to the limit, and the teachers I met inspired me many times. And finally, I'd like to thank my family for their continued support and encouragement. I will always remember this award. It is a perfect bow tie on my high school career. Moreover, it will be an inestimable motivation in my future academic pursuit. Thank you.
Bravo, thank you very much. Now we're going to hear from Caitlin Pringle, please. Caitlin, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Pringle. First of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone who was involved in this award, who made it happen. The three of us, well, I guess 5 in total, wouldn't be here talking to you without all of you supporting, and it's so generous. And when I found out, I was so over the moon. And I think for all of us, you know, we do the marks and get the marks that we do for ourselves, and that's a victory in itself. But it's nice to be recognized by somebody else as well. And it is that cherry on top. So it's a great moment. And I want to say congratulations to everybody else, because I know how it feels and you should be proud. It's an accomplishment. It's really exciting. And I'd like to thank my friends and my family, and of course my teachers throughout elementary school and high school. I wouldn't be where I am today or who I am today. And, you know, everyone who's been to high school knows that it's not all flowers and unicorns. So there are tough times, and without them, I don't know where I'd be. So they really pushed me forwards, and I'm just so grateful for having the support system that I have. So I'm excited to see what comes next, but thank you.
Well, congratulations and thank you. And now, please, we'd love to hear from Mia Sherba. Mia, go ahead.
Hi there, my name is Mia Sherba. I would just like to thank the City of London for recognition for this award. On behalf of myself and others, I can express how wonderful it feels to be recognized for all of our hard work and hours that went into this school year, especially in a school year where we didn't really receive a final graduation or goodbye. I think this really sums up the high school experience that we had and worked so hard for. I would also like to thank my parents for their endless support and love, and for always being there when I was stressed out over a test and not getting mad at me for yelling at them in a moment of panic. And I would like to thank my teachers at Beale for always believing in me and providing me with the resources that I needed to grow. This award really sums up my high school experience, and it will help me with my future academic endeavors. I am very grateful. Thank you.
Well, congratulations as well, Mia. And Nadine wasn't able to be here, but expressed her sincere appreciation as well. So congratulations to our 99.5% graduates. That is absolutely unbelievable and outstanding. You are extremely, extremely worthy. We have one other recognition, if I could, please. And we have one student who finished with an even higher average. Cindy Sun from London Central Secondary School completed her year with an amazing 99.67% average. She recently started her first year studying health sciences at McMaster University. She asked that I would share the following with colleagues, and here's what she's written. To Council, I'm writing to thank you sincerely for your generous $2,000 Queen Elizabeth Scholarship. I'm thrilled to receive this award, and I am deeply honored by and appreciate your invaluable support. I am currently in the Bachelor of Health Sciences program at McMaster and plan to pursue a career as a family physician. The financial assistance you have provided me will aid in paying for my education expenses and allow me to better focus my time on my education. Thank you again for your generosity and support. I am truly grateful, and will keep working hard in the future. So I need to say on behalf of Council to all 5 of these students that we're grateful for your commitment and your dedication, not only to your studies and your education, but to your community and fellow citizens, as evidenced by the various careers you're pursuing. So to all of you, to Anlin, to Caitlin, to Mia, to Nadine, to Cindy, may I say, congratulations to each of you, and we as Council wish you the best of luck in your post-secondary education. You know, that's a thrill that we get to do every year, so I couldn't be more pleased. The second item for which I am also delighted to acknowledge is the 25-year City of London Employee Service Recognition. Now, on behalf of the London City Council, it's a privilege to take this opportunity to honor and celebrate who live and who breathe public service. Tonight, we recognize the most recent members of our illustrious 25-year club, those who have provided 25 years of service to the City of London. we say thank you for all the hours, all the care, and all the service you've devoted to fellow Londoners. We all know your patience and resolve, we're sure, has been tested through these last 18 months in particular, like perhaps no other time during your respective careers. We have needed your experience, your skills, and your professionalism like never before, and each of you has stepped up in a major way. Before, during, and eventually after the pandemic, it is your example that has and will continue to inspire and guide your co-workers and fellow Londoners into the future. So I'd like to recognize each of you by name. First, from Enterprise Supports, we'd like to recognize Yaya Ibrahim. We would also like to recognize Walter Pimentel. From Environment and Infrastructure, we'd like to recognize Andy Beaton. Looks like Andy's got a focus already. From Finance Supports, we'd like to recognize Susanna Umeri. From Social and Health Development, Dearness Home, we would like to recognize Laura Bali. As well, Cindy Clark. Also, Elisa Fernandez Rafanan. As well, Teodoro Gall. As well, Robert J. Hatfield. As well, Wendy Kirk. As well, Rosa Masters. As well, Francisca Pagkaliwangan. As well, Irene Rivera. A huge number of colleagues and staff from Social and Health Development Dearness. From the London Police Services, we would like to recognize Glenn Hadley, Blair Harvey, Lori Legg, Lisa Molnar, Matthew Morton, Gary Nold, Brian Patnode, Trevor Poole, Dwayne Price, Julie Thompson, and Brian Wolfel. These are all of our senior staff, senior not just in terms of tenure, but in terms of their connection to our city. And I know I can speak on behalf of council when I say that the work, I'm sure, can be thankless at times, perhaps underappreciated or underrecognized, but not by us. But let me say, it's why occasions such as this are so important, because your contributions are so important. So once again, to all of our 25-year City of London employees, City Council says thank you so much for what you've done and what you still do for all of us. Perhaps a round of applause, we can recognize our 25-year employees, please. There are no confidential matters to be dealt with in public, but we will have some items to be dealt with in closed session, which will require change in order. So I will look for a motion to move item 4 in closed session and the 10th report of council in closed session to after stage 13 bylaws. For that, I'll look for a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Van Meerbergen. We will call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Now I'd like to deal with the minutes. So we'll require a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting held August 10th, 2021. And that will require a mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Thanks very much, colleagues. We have a number of communications and petitions under 6.1, proof of COVID-19 vaccination administration policy. One is communication from Ms. Livingston, and two are from Councillor Van Holst. Under 6.2, the outcome of climate lens screening applied to major transportation projects. We have three communications, T. Smith, S. Frankie, and M. Mixa, excuse me, please. And for those to be considered in the appropriate committees to be dealt with, it'll require a mover and a seconder. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Turner. We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 14-0.
Thank you, colleagues. Motions to which notice is given, which turns us now to the reports for the 12th report of the Planning Environment Committee. I'll call on Councillor Squire, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've not been advised of any matters to be pulled from this agenda, so given that, I'm prepared to move the entire report.
Does anyone wish to have anything dealt with separately? Comments or questions then, please? I have Councillor Hopkins, please.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, for recognizing me. And I just want to thank the committee for supporting the motion that we receive the EPAC comments on the climate change emergency action plan and have it forwarded to the standing committee with a report back, and really appreciate the support that the committee gave. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I see Councillor Hummer.
Thank you. Just briefly on the item related to 496 Dundas Street. This is the proposed development by York, just a block or so away from the future rapid transit station. Councillor Kaibaga asked me to fill in for this one since it's in Ward 13. And I will say the community is generally supportive. We had some people come to the meeting and speak in favor of the development. There is a bit of a desire to see some affordable housing integrated into the development, as the developer doesn't need or is not asking for bonus zoning. That's not possible to require through the zoning, but I still remain hopeful that something can be worked out where there'll be some affordable housing as part of this development, which is much needed and would provide some great housing options right here in the core of the city.
Thank you. I have Councillor Cassidy, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just want to comment on part number 7, which is 2.2 from the committee, or the draft Masonville secondary plan. I want to thank the committee. They made a slight amendment to the plan that the community was looking for, and it was endorsed by the committee and it passed. And so I'm really happy to see this plan go forward. It will help to guide development, and there's a lot of it that is on the horizon in this area. It straddles both Ward 7 and Ward 5. So really happy to see this plan moving forward and looking forward to the final version coming back in October. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll call the question.
Yeah, pretty close.
Councillor Van Holst. Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Councillor Squire.
That's the report.
Thank you very much. For the 12th, I'll call on Councillor Helmer, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not aware of any items that colleagues would like to pull separately, so I'm happy to put the entire report on the floor.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to have any one of these items voted on separately? Seeing none, Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out we did have a wonderful delegation about a policy pitch idea about responding to the opioid crisis, which I'm sure city staff are interested in seeing the comments from the students. I thought they did a great job in their delegation.
Thank you. Any other comments from colleagues? Seeing none, we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Councillor Hummer?
Thank for me.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that. For the 14th report of corporate services, I'll call on Councillor Cassidy, please.
Okay, let's see if we can make it a hat trick. I am not aware of any items being that people would want pulled. I see Councillor Turner and then Van Holst, however.
All right, well, let's Councillor Van Holst, which items would you like to have dealt with separately, please?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I believe it's 5.1 or number 13. I had asked a number of legal questions previously. I have some more. So I wonder if I think there's an opportunity to deal with that in camera and then come out afterwards and speak to it in public session.
So noted. Any other items colleagues wish to have dealt with separately? Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just with respect to number 8, if we can pull that, I just have a question and perhaps a friendly amendment.
So noted. Anything else, colleagues, you wish to have dealt with separately? Back to you, Councillor Cassidy, then, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just say of note, the industrial land development strategy, staff recommended a price increase there. When we look at every other city around us, pretty much, they are charging more for industrial land, and what we are offering, as described by staff, is top-notch A-level servicing of this land. So we have a really good product, and we've been more than competitive with our neighbors. So it's about time they do an annual review of the industrial land development strategy, including the pricing, and committee endorsed the staff recommendation to increase the pricing on that somewhat. Another item of note is the proclamation of Orange Shirt Day, recognizing the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, and going along with that as well is that a letter that came from Councillor Hopkins that will see the flag raised on the community flagpole on that day. So with that, I put all of this on the floor except for the items that have been pulled.
So with the exception of 4.1 and 5.1, any comments or questions on the balance of the report from colleagues? Councillor Hopkins, please.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And again, many thanks to the committee for supporting the direction of getting municipal support as we deal with truth and reconciliation. I know it was a big conversation at the AMO board that we had in August, and there's some information that is being passed through with this motion. I want to send my thanks to city staff. In the spirit of the agreement that we have with the Namrith Center, we were able to get the flag, Every Child Matters, and have it raised on September the 30th. And also with that comes the support of a report coming back as we deal with our flag policy and continue the conversation on how we can support municipalities through truth and reconciliation. So thank you, committee.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I see none. So with the exception of 4.1 and 5.1, we will call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Thank you. Councillor
So 4.1 or 8 on the council agenda is a letter submission from councillors Pelosa and Lewis regarding vacant residential buildings in the city. Put that on the floor.
Comments or questions? Councillor Turner, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Your Worship. But just for you, perhaps to either Councillor Pelosa or Councillor Lewis, I didn't have an opportunity to watch the discussion, but I was wondering if there was an opportunity in here to include commercial properties. I have concerns as well with respect to property speculation, especially within the core, and how that might impair our opportunities for development and realization of our downtown master plan.
I'd invite either Councillor Lewis or Pelosa or both to respond. Councillor Lewis, you start.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to Councillor Turner for the question. It's actually one that I've had from some members of the public as well, so an opportunity to respond to that is appreciated. So the short answer is no. We currently, under the powers that the province granted us in 2017, can only apply this currently to residential class. Although, as Councillor Helmer did point out at the committee meeting, in a building where there might be mixed use, so some commercial on the ground floor, but some apartment units over top, there may be an opportunity to apply it in those circumstances.
Councillor Pelosa?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Just following up on that, definitely interested in Councillor Turner's desire to help solve some of the issues in London. This one strictly for housing, as Councillor Lewis outlined, and really hoping for council support for that report back to allow us to make some movement on the housing file. I know it will be small. It's certainly not a stopgap for everything, but it is a small action we can take that's in our purview of units that are already built and out there and just sitting vacant. So thank you. Any
other comments or questions?
Thank you, Your Worship. Perhaps an opportunity for a small amendment, if it might be friendly to the movers, is in light of the response, and I appreciate that the powers may not currently be in our jurisdiction to do so on commercial properties, but there might be an opportunity to make an ask to the province for that. And my amendment would be to, in addition, to ask the province for similar powers with respect to commercial properties.
We'd have to take that back to the mover and seconder. So I've been advised by the clerk that would have to be in an amendment form. Councillor Turner?
Fair enough. Then I'd like to move an amendment that there might be a clause B to this that, the motion right in front of me, an additional clause, an additional lettered clause that states that a request be also made to the province to expand vacant property taxation to commercial class as well.
Do you have a seconder for that? I see Councillor Hopkins. Thank you. Comments or questions? Councillor Lewis, please go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, to Councillor Turner, I just wonder if he might consider, rather than just commercial, if he might see the language of additional property classes as amenable. I know that we also have, certainly in my ward, some vacant light industrial classes, things of that nature. And I think if the province wants to expand the power, I would be open to any sort of expansion that they want to give us, at least in discussion with them. So I wonder if he would see that as a way forward to address all property classes.
Let's take that back for a moment to Councillor Turner for his perspective on that, what was requested as a friendly amendment. Councillor Turner?
Through Your Worship, I'm open to that. I think it's reasonable. I think our largest crunches are both on residential and commercial, which is why I raised commercial specifically, but I can see the point as Councillor Lewis raised.
So I'd look to your seconder, Councillor Hopkins, if she's amenable. I see a yes there. So that would be deemed a friendly amendment. Other comments or questions? Then I'm sorry, Councillor Lewis, were you done then?
I'm done, Your Worship.
All right, thank you very much. Then I have Councillor Cassidy, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just want to thank Councillor Turner for bringing this up as well. And I think we're all sort of on the same page with this. And it's the idea of expanding our availability of space for housing. So it's not about going after empty or vacant commercial lots. This is what where my thinking is, but it's about going after available space that we can then repurpose for housing, and that's the first step, is having those that land or that space or whatever is out there sitting vacant and being able to use it for the people that need a place to live.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Worship, and I'm happy to entertain this. However, I think I would prefer to see this come as a separate motion to committee rather than as an add-on. It seems like quite a different thing. Lobbying the government is different than what's being asked for by our councillors.
Just as a point, it's been accepted as an amendment subject to the vote. So we'll treat that accordingly. If you want that dealt with as a separate item, I would suggest, Councillor, I think the activity, if I can just add some clarity, is would involve more proactivity, but it is an amendment to the main motion. Any other comments, Councillor Van Holst?
No, I realize that in this case, that would have been my preference, but I still think it's a worthy idea.
So noted. Thank you. Councillor Hopkinson.
Yes, my thanks, first of all, to Councillor Lewis and Pelosa for bringing this forward. I really do appreciate the conversation when it comes to vacant properties and the need to address, and I also want to thank Councillor Turner for bringing this amendment forward too, because I think we all know more needs to be done, and this is an opportunity to address the needs of the housing crisis that we have in our city, and to send a letter to the province to address looking at all classes, tax classes. So very supportive, and many thanks to all three councillors for this.
Thank you. I have no other speakers to the amendment. So this is on the amendment. We will call the question.
Closing the vote.
Colleagues will now look to the motion as amended. Comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll call the question. Oh. So the as amended will require the mover and seconder. So I'll look for a mover for that, please. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Thank you very much. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Councillor Cassidy.
Item 13 on the floor, but I believe Councillor Van Holst had requested that this be dealt with after we go in camera.
Yes, and then what we can do is put that back into public session following the confidential session. So anything else for you then, Councillor Cassidy?
That is it.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. 11th report of Civic Works. I'll call on Councillor Pelosa, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have been given notice to pull items 18 being 2.14 and 19 being 2.15. Not sure if there's any others.
Does anyone have any other items they wish to have dealt with separately? Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you. I'll put the remainder of the items on the floor, noting there was several condition assessments laid out before us at Civic Works dealing with culverts and wastewater management, which will help for better informed budget decisions and deliberations going forward in the future. And the committee did receive a delegation or several delegations for e-scooter feedback that's still being publicly collected on the city's website. If any other members of the public wish to have feedback, as there will be a staff report later this fall for committee and council's consideration.
Thank you. Any colleagues wish to provide any comments or have any questions? Councillor Turner.
Just wanted to draw attention to 2.11 and 2.12, the corporate energy consumption and activities report and the community energy use and greenhouse gas inventory emissions report. These are really helpful for us to be able to best target our climate action initiatives and understand where we can have the most impact and the most room for improvement in terms of our greenhouse gas production or reductions in those areas, especially around transportation and buildings, and taking a look at both what we can do within the corporation and what we can help support within the community. The way we build and our building patterns and helping to rehabilitate buildings so that they are not a significant contributor of greenhouse gases. Our transportation networks and choices go a long way towards helping to reduce greenhouse gas. And that goes right into the corporation in terms of us looking at how we maintain our fleet appropriately and make sure that we've made the right choices to have the lowest impacts. So I thank staff for producing these. I draw it to both the council and the public's attention because I think these are really important. And you'll see that there's a couple other discussions today that kind of hinge around what these findings are.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Pelosi?
Thank you. I had put those items on the floor for a vote, excluding item 2.14 and 2.15.
Then we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Councillor Pelosi?
Thank you. 1.4 is the outcome of climate lens screening applied to major transportation projects. Council declared the climate emergency in April 2019. Ms. Scher joined our committee and had a 5-minute presentation, as this is the first time we're discussing the climate lens and a staff's recommendation in regards to a project. I will put this item on the floor.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to address the portion of this motion to the Wonderland Road widening. What I'd like to do is I'd like to put an amendment on the floor, and then after a seconder is presented, then I'd like to speak to it with your permission. The amendment, which the clerk has a copy, reads that clause 2.14 of the 11th report of the Civic Works Committee be amended by adding the following new part D. The civic administration be directed to include specific actions to address traffic congestion areas on Wonderland Road in the development of the future mobility master plan. It being noted that the corridor will be evaluated as part of the upcoming plan with a focus on transit, high occupancy, vehicle use, and active transportation.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder for that? I see Councillor Squire seconding. Comments, questions? Councillor Lehman, back to you.
Thank you. You know, colleagues, this is a big change in direction for the city. For at least 2 terms, the widening of Wonderland Road has been going through the EA process and part of a bigger plan for the development in the west. And rightly so, the city had foreseen residential development both in the northwest and in the southwest. and the increased volume of traffic that would come from those developments. Ever since I've been in office, I've heard serious concerns and witnessed every day the congestion on the north-south route on Wonderland. And no surprise, this is the last bridge across the river on the west. There's folks coming up to major commercial centers with Costco, and then within a kilometer, Farm Boy Mall, and then farther up, access to the Walmart big box development on Fanshawe. And going south, access to the 401, and not to mention people going to and fro from work at rush hour. The congestion is not just at rush hour, though. It's consistent throughout the week and on weekends with both those things. This is the last, it's our access to the 401 for many commuters as well. In the future, it's going to be only enhanced as more development is happening in the north and the south, and with such things as the casino and Amazon, Talbotville, et cetera, et cetera. It's congested now. It's going to that congestion is only going to increase. My constituents have been told by me that the choke points that they're experiencing, we can't do anything for. Don't worry, that's going to be addressed when we widen the road. And now we're changing course of that plan. So the purpose of this motion is to highlight the need for staff to address these choke points. If we're not widening Wonderland Road, we need very specific action in this area that a general master plan might not include. So for those that are using Wonderland, both in my ward and in a fellow councilor's ward that are on Wonderland, I have to ensure that these concerns are going to be held, because now we're going to have to wait for a few more years while another plan is being developed. So hence my motion to amend this to really highlight these areas and to focus staff on bringing credible solutions in lieu of widening. So thank you for your consideration.
To the amendment, any other comments or questions? I see Councillor Squire.
I will also have extensive comments on the main motion and the report that staff submitted, but those may get me in trouble, so I'll present those later. What I want to say right now is I'm like Councillor Lehman, I spent my entire term getting concerns and complaints from people, particularly people who reside on Proudfoot Lane and the many buildings that are located there, the seniors that are there, very concerned about their safety in using Proudfoot Lane. And the issue, of course, is that people often use Proudfoot Lane as a cut-through to avoid the congestion that is there on Wonderland Road. So they've asked over a period of time for solutions to that problem. And I think one of the solutions that's going to have to be looked at, quite frankly, if we don't go with the widening of Wonderland Road, is controlling somehow the access from Proudfoot Lane onto Oxford Street so it isn't used as a cut-through. And I need to ensure for all those constituents who I said to, the same as Councillor Lehman, while we're working on it, we're going to make some changes to Oxford Street that will hopefully help, so stay tuned for that. I have to ensure that when staff goes back, if the widening is put on hold, that their concerns are addressed. And I certainly couldn't be a responsible councillor if I didn't make sure all of those concerns were addressed. And quite frankly, the mobility master plan, I mean, we love creating things at City Hall, and now we're creating a mobility master plan. Quite frankly, and I hope staff hears this, I have no idea what that is. I don't know if that's going to address infrastructure. I don't know if it's going to just address buses. I don't know. I really don't know what it is. It's very generally described in this report, but again, it's a creature that's going to be created. I don't know how long this plan's going to take. Is it going to take a year? Is it going to take 5 years? And so this amendment will at least help me with that. But I have many more concerns that I'll be voicing when the main report comes forward for approval, because quite frankly, the approach that staff took is not one that I accept.
Thank you. I next have Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and I'll just speak to the amendment only. And I do have a question reviewing the amendment. It addresses congestion areas on Wonderland Road, and this is my question, and maybe through you to staff. First of all, I would like to make a comment that there's a lot of confusion out there in the community when it comes to the 2 lanes that are going to be widened on Wonderland. And I have a ward that abuts Wonderland to the south, but it doesn't really have any part of the widening of Wonderland that is before us. And I think that's important for the public to understand, that we're looking at 8 kilometers from Sarnia to Southdale in that area only. And I want to make sure that, first of all, this amendment only pertains to that area, because I understand there are plans, future plans through the transportation plan and through the mobility master plan that is going to be coming to us soon, that will address widening or not on Wonderland. And I really want to be specific here to what exactly this amendment means. Is it specific to the widening to 6 lanes? First of all, to the councillor, and secondly, to staff, if they have any concerns.
Let's start with Councillor, and then we'll go to Ms. Scher.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Yeah, my concern here is definitely is in the choke points that I touched on. We see choke points at the bridge both ways at rush hour. We see choke points at commercial developments all along Wonderland and all the way up to Fanshawe. But my purpose here was to address the specific suspension of the widening of Wonderland Road that's in the original motion.
Ms. Scher?
Thank you, Your Worship. As Councillor Hopkins correctly noted, we are looking from Southdale to Sarnia with respect to the Discover Wonderland EA that is the subject of this report. Staff do not have any concerns about the motion to look at means to better manage congestion, traffic flow, reduce volumes, provide for more efficient and safe flow along the corridor limits within Discover Wonderland as part of the environmental assessment, or pardon me, as part of the mobility master plan process. And certainly this recommendation in the report does not preclude the consideration of other aspects of Wonderland and what the future operations and design need to be on those sections as part of that mobility master plan. Just to note, the mobility master plan is a replacement to our former transportation master plans, but what has changed is that we want to integrate our active modes, including cycling and pedestrianism, as well as walking, as transit, into one comprehensive transportation plan focused on the movement of goods and people versus having separate plans by mode.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you for the clarification from staff and from Councillor Lehman. I hear you loud and clear that this only pertains to Wonderland Road widening to 6 lanes from Sarnia to Southdale. I would appreciate maybe that being put in the motion to prevent further confusion out in the public when we talk about lane widening on Wonderland. I think the conversation here is specific to 6 lanes in this area and nowhere else. And like Ms. Scheer said, we are going to have further conversations through the Mobility Master Plan to deal with the challenges that exist along Wonderland Road, like Councillor Lehman mentioned, the casino. So, but this has got nothing to do, this amendment has nothing to do with these other stress areas on Wonderland other than the between Sarnia and Southdale. So I would make that comment. I'm okay after hearing staff's comments to support the amendment. But for further clarification, I think it's important that we really, when we talk about the changes that we're making, that we are as clear as possible in what our intentions are. So I would encourage that friendly amendment. Thank you.
I'm not sure if a friendly amendment is required, but I thought it was clear that the intent was that this amendment apply to the area as described in the original motion. And I think that's implicit in the amendment. I'm not sure it needs to be any more explicit, but I'm at the pleasure of council on that. Councillor Hopkins, any other comment on that? I know you signed off, but I'll bring you back in if you have any other final comment.
No, those are my comments, and this is just to the amendment.
Yes, it is. Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. And my first question through you to staff is about the timing of the mobility master plan. When do we hope to see that?
Ms. Scher?
Thank you, Your Worship. We are in the process of scoping and providing the terms of reference that would go to a consultant right now. So the intent would be to provide that information about the scope and scale and schedule to committee and council later this year. The process itself, including a very extensive public consultation plan, is likely to take all of 2022 and part of 2023. So we are looking at options potentially to bring that back in phases if that's possible, but there's some work that needs to be done around that. So I would expect that you would hear from us at some point in later 2023.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. And my next question is, how far are we into the EA for the Wonderland widening, and when would that be completed if we were just to go forward with it?
Sure.
Thank you. The EA for the Wonderland widening, it was about 18 months or so underway at the time. We had been out for some public consultation. There's probably another year's worth of work that would need to happen on the EA before it was submitted for consideration and approval through the provincial process. So fair bit of work there yet.
Okay. Yes, thank you. And the amendment is for other strategies to deal with the congestion. Can you suggest what some of those other strategies might be? Is there a realistic hope in this amendment?
Sure.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I believe there is. So this corridor carries between 30 and 50,000 vehicles a day, depending on the time of year. Half of those are one occupant vehicles, so single occupant vehicles. So there certainly are some options related to increasing vehicle occupancy that could make a significant difference. The peak and congestion times along this corridor are very defined and quite significant versus some of the after hours use of it. So there are some abilities through things like transportation demand management, which could spread the peak out by just changing people's commute habits slightly. That could be very valuable. There are currently 19 transit routes along this location that we can provide some consideration about how those are accommodated through things like queue jump lanes that could potentially improve flow. There's also a number of commercial driveways, each of which represents a conflict point along there. And we also have a number of locations that create some issues. I think the one that Councillor Lehman referred to might be Beaverbrook. And he correctly notes that staff had said there is a widening that needs to happen to address some of the congestion there. But the widening is actually on the east-west road. It's actually on Beaverbrook. And this decision would not preclude us making intersection improvements to ensure things function safely and effectively.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. And my next concern is that we might want to extend the amendment to Adelaide Street because we're doing the underpass, and if anything's going to induce traffic flow to Adelaide Street, that would be it. As a matter of fact, that's what we're hoping, is that people will take that street. Because so what's the impact going to be on Adelaide Street when we finish that if we don't widen the road?
I'm inclined to bring that forward to the main motion. That's not specific to this motion here, if that's all right, Councillor Van Holst.
Well, Your Worship, I might be, if it seemed like we needed some congestion management strategies for Adelaide as well, then I would ask if there's a friendly amendment to Councillor Lehman's motion. So that's why I'm asking this question.
If that's being directed to Councillor Lehman, I'll ask the question of Councillor Lehman.
With all respect to Councillor Van Holst, this motion amendment is specific to Wonderland, and I would ask that he would bring another amendment to in another format, not included into this.
Councillor Van Holst, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that's reasonable. So at your suggestion, Your Worship, I'll ask this question again in the main motion, at which point I could request another amendment.
So noted. Thanks very much. Anything else, Councillor Van Holst?
I don't think so.
All right, good. Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. And realizing that Councillor Van Holst is going to speak to this again, I just want to try to put it to bed now. This area of Adelaide is in Ward 5. It's nowhere near the underpass project. It is in the far north end of Adelaide, and there are road improvements scheduled to take place along Sunningdale Road, which is where Adelaide meets at this point. And there is significant intersection improvements also being planned at Adelaide and Sunningdale Road. So with respect to the councillor, the underpass project is kilometers away from the section of Adelaide that is in this report and will not be affected by the underpass project.
That may or may not have saved time on the main motion, Councillor Cassidy. I guess we'll see any other comments or questions, please. I'd ask the Deputy Mayor to take the floor. The Chair, please.
Yes, I have the mayor on the list.
Thanks very much, colleagues. I think what we're being asked to consider feels quite reasonable to me when you look specifically at what the amendment says, that we look at congestion areas or pinch points, if you will, on Wonderland Road in the area that's impacted by the main motion. So it seems to me, particularly when you consider the high use in peak times, particularly the impact on transit, pedestrians and the like, and all various forms of active transportation, I think that Councillor Lehman's amendment feels extremely reasonable, and I hope colleagues will support that. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
I'll turn the chair back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I show no other speakers on the, oh, I do, pardon me, Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to ask a basic question, and that is, currently we have a mobility master plan, the 2030 mobility master plan. Why do we need another mobility master plan? I see the current one, the 2030 mobility master plan, also talks about things like queue jump lanes and so on. Maybe this is a good time to ask staff, how much should we spend? I think it was ACOM that was the consultant on that. How much should we spend for that master plan that we're currently under?
Ms. Scheer, over to you.
Your Worship, I don't have that information available to me at this point, but mobility master plans are typically updated certainly with each decade. We are in a position where that ours needs to be updated at this time to reflect changes in development and growth within the city.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Is there somebody from finance that might be attending this meeting that might have that information?
Well, let's turn that over to finance. I'm not sure if any advanced prep on that might have been offered. Maybe they'll have a response. Not sure. I'll go to finance. Ms. Barbone, are you able to respond, or one of your colleagues?
Yes, through the chair, the number that we did spend on the transportation master plan, the smart moves, which the work was done in 2009 and concluded in 2013, was a total of $687,000.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
So if I could just understand, what are we trying to achieve with this current one that's not already in the, or sorry, the one that we're proposing that isn't already achieved in the one that exists now to take us to 2030?
Ms. Scher?
So thank you, Your Worship. These are 20-year plans that get updated halfway through. So this one will take us to 2040, and it will reflect changes in travel patterns, the implementation of the new rapid transit routes, the growth and intensification of the city. So the data that underlies our current plan is from 2009. It was analyzed through 2010, 2011. This one went a little bit later. So it is time for us to make that review to reflect not only what has changed in our city so far, as well as the changes that we project based on the anticipated growth patterns in the city that we did not know about a decade ago.
Councillor River.
Yes, thank you. The way I look at the way Wonderland is functioning right now and has been for some time, or non-functioning, is that it's a continual choke point. You know, there's this talk that, you know, we'll address the choke points. The whole stretch is a choke point. It's over capacity as we speak. I want to know if voting for this type of an amendment will forego any hope of widening in the next couple of years. Let's say 2025, which is supposed to be scheduled to begin.
Ms. Scher?
Your Worship, so should council support the motion to discontinue the environmental assessment, Discover Wonderland, staff would cease any work on the environmental assessment at this point. Should council, once the mobility master plan is concluded, direct us to revitalize that, we would probably have about a year's worth of work in order to move to detailed design and construction. It would not preclude a future council from directing us to widen, but it would create delay in implementation from the current schedule.
Councillor Rimbergen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions, colleagues, on the amendment? I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-1.
So, colleagues, we're now looking at the motion as by our mover, Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Oh, excuse me, Councillor Lehman, that wasn't, you weren't moving? Just clarify, please.
No, that wasn't to move. I was requesting the floor again.
Well, not yet, but we'll get you there just now.
Because it refers to the motion that you want to vote on or want to put on the floor.
We have just approved an amendment.
Correct.
So now we're looking to the motion as amended.
I have another motion towards that, a referral.
Referrals take priority. Is there a seconder for referral? Now this is on the main motion.
Can I be allowed to read it?
Just a moment, please. Go ahead, Councillor Lehman, please.
Thank you. That consideration of Part A, 1 of Clause 2.14 of the 11th Report of the Civic Works Committee be referred to a future meeting of the Civic Works Committee following the consideration of the future mobility master plan. And then after a seconder, I'd like to speak to it again. I'll be brief.
On the referral, do you have a seconder? I see Councillor Squire. Councillor Lehman, go ahead.
Thank you. So a lot of work, a lot of years have been put into planning. I've been to many PPMs, as have other councillors, where I've seen the plans. I've seen designs for another bridge as part of the widening project of Wonderland, which included many different types of mobility upgrades. I think be remiss to put aside that plan until I see what is replacing that plan to address the congestion that we're currently seeing and we'll see in future years. So that is a purpose behind the referral, is to allow me to make the best decision possible by seeing, will the new options and plans put forward, as we've just approved an amendment, be sufficient, in my point of view, my constituents' point of view, to sufficiently address the challenges that we're facing on Wonderland. So thank you for your consideration.
Thanks very much. Other comments or questions? Councillor Turner, please.
Through your worship, perhaps to Ms. Chair, what would be the impact of that, of such a referral in terms of being able to move forward on the material components of the rest of this motion?
Ms. Chair?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would seek clarification from the councillor if I've interpreted this incorrectly, but the effect of this motion would still be that we cease work on the Discover Wonderland EA, but that we would retain 6 laning as an option for consideration through the Mobility Master Plan.
I'll go back to the councillor for clarification.
Yeah, the reasoning behind this referral is I'm concerned with suspending Wonderland Road widening without an alternative, sufficient alternative plan in place of it. I don't mind, a temporary delay. I know it's semantics. I get it. However, I've learned in my time here at council, semantics can sometimes bite you when you didn't consider it one way or another. So I'm very cautious about putting an official suspension until I see what's replacing it.
Back to you, Councillor Turner.
Thanks to you both. Through your worship, I would encourage my colleagues to defeat the referral. I think this confuses the process. I can appreciate the amendment that was brought forward previously by Councillor Lehman. I think that was well considered, and seeks to address the concerns that he's had. A referral, I think, significantly risks impairing the project. It risks impairing the other components of this. I think it also seeks only to confuse what might come back and perhaps prejudice the outcomes as well. So I'm not supportive of the referral. I hope my colleagues won't as well.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Councillor Squire.
The reason I supported this is, quite frankly, I do not believe, and again, this will come out, I don't believe there is enough information in the report provided by staff to justify even the suspension of the widening at this time. But in the hopes of having an open mind, I think the next best alternative is to say, look, as you go through this master project, this master mobility master plan, keep it on the table. My biggest concern is the opposite of what Councillor Turner is saying. My concern is it'll be put to the side and no longer considered an option for this area. We've heard much from Ms. Scheer today about all these different options, different types of lanes. Well, let's get them all out on the table through this process, including the widening, and then council will be in the best position to determine which of the options is the best. It will also enable us to speak to our constituents, many of mine who are very concerned about what's going on Oxford Street, and let staff come forward and explain to us why widening is not the best option. Is that unreasonable? I don't think it is at this point in time. And I think all Councillor Lehman and I are saying is, look, when you say you're suspending it, that's not the language we want. We still want this on the table as part of the consideration that's going to be made in this process. And I don't think that's unreasonable.
Other comments or questions? Councillor Hummer.
Thank you. So I'm definitely not going to support the referral. I would encourage my colleagues, sometimes we have to actually make decisions. And we can't just put things off endlessly without deciding what to do. And we have in the Transportation Master Plan, which came forward many years ago, a plan to take Wonderland Road from 4 to 6 lanes. And having applied the climate screening tool to the major transportation projects that are in that plan. The staff are recommending that on 2 of them, the widening of Adelaide from 2 to 4 lanes and the widening of Wonderland from 4 to 6 lanes in that section, that both of those things be suspended because they don't meet our climate change adaptation and mitigation objectives. Widening the road just doesn't make sense. Beyond the climate rationale for it, it's also unbelievably expensive project. It's very expensive. It's like the most expensive project floating around there in the transportation master plan is that widening of Wonderland Road. And you can understand why. It's got to widen a bridge. It's got to go through the train overpass. Like, this is a very expensive undertaking that's very disruptive. And so when you look at it and you say, it doesn't make sense from a climate perspective, also it's really expensive. I mean, what more do we need to know that that's not a good option anymore? And by making a decision now to suspend this EA, staff can focus on all the other things that could be done that aren't going from 4 to 6 lanes. And it's clear to me that that is what needs to happen. And so I would like to make that decision now so that staff can work around what are the constraints now and how can we optimize the movement of people along that corridor, whether they're in vehicles or buses or they're walking or taking bikes, that they can get around better without widening and without incurring that huge cost. It's over $200 million just to widen 8 kilometers of roadway. There's lots of things that could be done on Oxford Street. It's come up a lot. The one that's approved in the Transportation Master Plan, it's in the Rapid Transit Master Plan that we've approved, and all we haven't done is funded it, is widening Oxford Street to add transit lanes as part of rapid transit. So if people want to do something to help out Oxford Street, let's do that project. Let's put it in for funding and go ahead and build it. But Wonderland Road going from 4 to 6 lanes, it's just going to get more expensive. It's just going to be worse and worse for the climate as time passes. And I'm not interested in taking it from 4 to 6 lanes. The staff recommendation is a very good one. We need to be decisive about this project. I think the other amendments that were suggested, I supported them. I think those are reasonable. There's lots of things that could be done that are not widening, but widening from 4 to 6 lanes should be suspended. And now I hope you defeat the referral, which would be a referral for like multiple years, and just make a decision now.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And may I ask our staff the cost of completing the EA for Wonderland Road?
Ms. Sharon.
Your Worship, I'm just going to check in with staff on that. I don't seem to have that number in my many pages ahead of me, in front of me, or if I do, I'm on the wrong page. So as soon as I have that number, I'll provide it.
Are you able to ask another question or make a comment, Councillor Van Holst, while that's being tabulated?
Okay, well, I'll extemporize, Your Worship. I do question the change. It seems to me that we're already in need of options to get people from the north to the south along this corridor, and widening would work despite the cost. It does seem like a good approach. To think about telling people you can't travel alone in your car when people are wearing masks to avoid and are trying to avoid being 2 meters from others. I think driving alone maybe become more popular, and then I understand people maybe are looking at getting cars just to do that. So I wonder about our plans for the future. Certainly people aren't going to be walking from the southwest to western in the mornings to get to work or to get to school. That's a little too far. So I may not support this particular part of the project. However, I might like to see this EA done so that when the amendment that Councillor Lehman first brought forward is looked at, we can have a pretty excellent look at what a widening would be. And I think that would be a decision we could be very confident with because we'd have all the information there. So maybe I could ask if there's an answer to the question about the cost for the finishing of the EA. I understand it would take a year to finish that. That might be worth it for me.
Let's ask that question. Ms. Scher, any luck with that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for your patience. We have about $250,000 in outstanding work to complete the EA. I would caution against trying to do that in parallel to the Mobility Master Plan. I think that is a difficult conversation to have in terms of engaging the community in two separate processes related to some of the same assets.
So thank you for that question, Your Worship. So is our city engineer suggesting that if we went forward with the Wonderland EA, we should just complete that first and then move on to the Mobility Master Plan?
Ms. Scher?
Your Worship, unfortunately, we were at a position that if there's a desire to proceed with both, we would do both. But to do both just as potential input into the Mobility Master Plan would be challenging. So if there is a desire to proceed with 6 laning, and our clear recommendation from a climate change perspective is to not proceed with 6 laning, we would have to pursue both at the same time. What I understood from the councillor's thought process or sharing was that he would like to have the EA completed as an input to the Mobility Master Plan, or to have data from the EA. I don't know that we generate anything different from the EA than the Mobility Master Plan would get us, unless the intent is to pursue 6 laning.
Councillor Van Holst?
Okay, thank you. So again, I'll make just a couple more comments about my reservations with respect to the climate change strategy. I see not doing a widening early as something that's going to create a lot of congestion, and that's going to mean a lot of greenhouse gases emitted while people are idling and going bumper to bumper to try and get through the intersections. In terms of long term, we're moving towards other technologies. I have lots of faith in the engineers of the world in terms of dealing with EVs and things like that. So I think we'll be in the latter years not really worrying about the emissions, because we'll have cars that don't have many. And of course, here in Ontario, most of our energy is clean. And with the expansion of the Bruce plant, it'll remain clean. So, however, we'll still have trouble moving the growing number of people around the city. And so I think there's still value in some widening despite the expense. And so I would like to see that back still on the table. So that those are my comments. I'll see what's required when it comes to the vote.
Thanks. Colleagues, I was trying to balance out discussion about the referral with some other comments that were added in. We're speaking to the referral. Councillor Hopkins, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I am only speaking to the referral here as well. So I appreciate the conversation we've had to date on this, and appreciate staff's comments as well on this referral. To Councillor Lehman's motion, I will not be supporting the referral, and I'll probably be very brief with my comments. I am and heard from the councillor loud and clear the concerns in his community on the choke points along Wonderland, and supported the amendment that we just had. I hear those concerns loud and clear. What I don't hear, though, is why we would even refer this. We know it's going to add the confusion to the process of the Mobility Master Plan as we continue with the conversation of widening. I appreciate the fact that he's just trying to keep this open. But the reality is we have a recommendation in front of us that is asking us, with the the work that went into this to suspend. And I'm not here to debate if we, I have not heard one reason why we would suspend this. If anything, comments from the community want us to take a stand here and to do something and be leaders, not only when it comes to climate change, but when it comes to moving around the city. And as a ward representative in the southwest part of the city that has difficulty moving around, this almost makes me want to cry inside, because we are not moving forward here when we start doing the confusion and the semantics of where we're going to go as a city. I think we owe it to Londoners to make hard decisions. That's why we're elected. It's not easy, but we owe it to Londoners to be as transparent with them and to make these hard decisions. So I will not be supporting this referral back.
Thank you. Do I have any other comments or questions? I see Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm sorry that in all of the discussion going on, I was a little confused. I want to know if going ahead or referring this means that we go ahead with the EA. And I just want this clear from the city engineer. So we go ahead with the EA and the mobility master plan is delayed while we go ahead with this EA.
Ms. Sher, can you answer that?
Your Worship, the way I would understand this motion is that we would not proceed with the EA. It would be put on hold versus canceled. We would, however, keep 6-laning of Wonderland as an option in the mobility master plan, and that would be one of the things we'd consider through that process. I would remind that this is here as a result of the screening of our major transportation projects through the climate change lens. So we've gotten into a bit of the scoping of the mobility master plan through this debate, but that's the way I would see this motion should it succeed, is instead of deciding 6-laning is not an option for Wonderland, we would retain that option, go through the mobility master plan, and that at that point make a decision as to whether or not to shelve the widening or proceed with concluding the EA after the mobility master plan is done.
Councillor Cassidy.
That's good for me. I won't be supporting the referral though.
Thank you. Other comments or questions then? Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Mayor, I just wanted to ask you, will we have an opportunity after the referral vote to speak to the whole motion, or are we doing everything now?
It's kind of like if the referral passes, then that's exactly what it is, and it will be dealt with at a future time.
All right, well then perhaps I'll just make some comments now since others have. We have to remind ourselves there's basically 3 major arterials that service London continually from the 401 right through the city. And that's Veterans Memorial Parkway, Highbury, and Wonderland. 2 are on the east side of the city, only 1 services the west, and that's Wonderland. We're asking an awful lot from this little 4-laner. And then of course, when you get closer down towards the 401, it's only 2 lanes. So there's a lot of pressure in this corridor. And as has been pointed out earlier, there's a lot of development that's taking place in the north end of the city, as well as the south, southwest. All of this is feeding and funneling into the Wonderland corridor. And what we have right now just doesn't suffice. I think any of us knows that. Certainly deep down in our hearts, we know there's a problem on Wonderland. And it's a problem that's greater than just tweaking with buses and bicycles. We've got more and more trucks, transport goods that have to move up and down this corridor. So our engineering staff have known this. The consultants that we've used in the past have known this. So much so that we've been building development charges to fund this project since 2004. And we are continuing to do so. My understanding right now, maybe I could ask staff, what percentage of the amount for the total project do we have right now in development charges? What's the percentage that would be funded through DCs?
Ms. Sher?
Your worship, Ms. Barbon is here to answer any questions related to DCs and finance.
Let's go to Ms. Barbone then, please.
Yes, thank you through the chair. So there are 10 discrete different projects for the Wonderland Road widening. Each of them have varying levels of budget allocations with respect to development charges. They range from 94.7% growth down to 58.1% growth based on the discrete part of the project that's been allocated. So that is being collected for under the development charge study, background study that is currently in effect. All of development charges are in fact collected on a broad level and go into the reserve funds, but are not actually allocated into the projects until the spending is actually scheduled to occur. So they are held through the reserve funds until they are needed.
Councillor Emmer.
Is it correct to say, Ms. Barbone, that the average DC funding for the entire project is around 75%?
Sorry, do you mean in the aggregate, Councillor Van Meerbergen?
Correct, yes.
Ms. Barbone?
All 10 projects.
Ms. Barbone?
Yes, thank you through the chair. So the weighted average based on the dollar value of the projects is approximately 7.75% for those 10 projects. That's correct.
Councillor?
And as we've heard earlier, this project's not even scheduled at the earliest to be finished until 2037, which gives 16 years to plan additional funding over the course. So clearly, the whole system knows that we needed to get things set up. As I said, it started in 2004. This has to go. We're on the very, I think we're dancing on a pin here a little bit, because we can't make another mistake transportation wise for the people of this city, similar to what happened in 1970 when the no was given to the Ring Road Expressway, the Ring Road Freeway. So we just can't afford as a community, as a city, to make a mistake with Wonderland. I've heard it said that, yes, we have to move people, and of course we do. And how do people in London, Ontario choose to move? They move in vehicles. And we're not going to change that. It's not going to happen. Yes, transit, bicycles, yes, a secondary system, important, we should have that. In fact, this current EA is already encapsulating transit and bicycles as part of this project. So I guess just to wrap up, what we're doing here originally with the widening of Wonderland makes a lot of sense, and it cannot be off the table, because I think anybody, if you look at this thing objectively and rationally, knows that it's going to have to go another lane. And if that lane means it's an HOV lane with buses and cars with 2 or more passengers or 2 or more people in them, then so be it. At least you have that option. But if you don't have the 6 lanes, much more constrained and ongoing horrible congestion. And the talk that this is somehow related to climate change, we all know the cars are getting more and more electrified with
30 seconds, Councillor.
With no greenhouse gas emissions. So clean technology, this works. We're ready to go. The system's in place to finance it. I just want to keep that front and center. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Closer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll lead with a spoiler alert that I will not be supporting the referral. I did support Clause D, but I do believe in the hard decisions that we need to make as councillors that put us here. In 2019, Council declared a climate emergency. We asked for clear, transparent rules to help us make these decisions. And that's what staff's done for us. This is what they brought back. This is our first opportunity to show if we're going to actually follow what we've asked for. It might not be popular, but that's the job that's before us tonight. Staff have come back and said it does not meet the climate emergency screening tool that they've now implemented that we're looking with. there's a $212 million project before us, and staff say they could do better, being better accounted for with money, and recognizing there's huge maintenance costs for snow removal and concrete and asphalt repairs as we move forward with this. And of course, Londoners pick cars. It's all we build for. We don't have active transportation. We don't have bike routes. We don't have a full rapid transit plan in front of us. Of course, people are going to buy a car. Those who are privileged and wealthy enough will buy a car. The rest will still figure out how to do what they need to do with public transit, bikes, and walking, because that's what we left them with. And for me, let's be honest, if we're going from 4 to 6 lanes, we're not widening a road. We're building a highway. We're building a highway that's going to divide our city even more, making it even more horrifically ugly sides of the streets as much as staff tries to make them beautiful. They're not pedestrian friendly. There's going to be setbacks to businesses. Those with transportation mobility issues are going to have a hard time crossing 6 lanes of traffic in the amount of time that any traffic light will give them. We know that people block sidewalks and people have a hard time using intersections as it is. London's only going to keep growing. The transportation is going to get worse for traffic congestion and flow. And by time, even if we did move forward and build and expand Wonderland Road, by time it gets built, because we only built for cars, it's going to open at capacity, if not over, and we're going to have induced demand, be having the same conversation. Whoever sits around this horseshoe 3 councils from now is going to be back and talking about the same issues. So I will not be supporting the referral. I will be supporting staff doing better traffic management through a mobility master plan, through TIMS and other opportunities we have, as I do not believe this is the option. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is one of those debates where I chose not to speak and to sit back and listen. And I think as the discussion has continued, I've gotten a little more confused about what we're talking about. Earlier in the debate, before Councillor Lehman even raised his point of a referral, I heard the city engineer say that suspending the Discover Wonderland assessment meant we do the mobility master plan, and there was the point made that a future council could actually revive that and have about 1 year worth of work left. And it seems like the referral does the same thing. So at first, I'm thinking I'm not going to support the referral. I don't see it's redundant. But now words like cancel and councilors are interpreting the current wording in the current motion differently than I had understood based on earlier in the debate. So I guess I want to go back to the city engineer and understand the earlier comments about what suspend actually means, because I heard the answer before and it sounded to me like you're setting it aside, we're doing the mobility master plan, that's going to have its result in that there are decision points. We can't bind a future council, so someone else could pick it up where it left off and carry it forward. Is that true? And that's the only question I have.
Let's ask Ms. Scheer.
Thank you, Your Worship. So what we would take the referral to mean is that we would continue to consider 6 laning as an option through the mobility master plan. The recommendation from staff is we suspend all additional work on Discover Wonderland and do not consider 6 laning as part of the mobility master plan. What is still true is a future council, should they decide they wish to pursue 6 laning, of course, could instruct staff to do differently in the future at any time.
Thanks very much. Any other comments or questions then? On the referral, we will call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion is lost, 6-8.
So colleagues, that takes us now back to the original motion as amended. And for that, I will look for a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Turner. Thanks very much. We've had a fairly healthy discussion, colleagues, on referral, which really, I think, addressed a lot of the issues that may come up in this. So if there are some new comments or other comments you'd like to make, I know that the public would love to hear them, so any comments or questions? Councillor Cassidy.
Yeah, sorry, Your Worship, I did not speak at all on the main motion, and I just want to say I support it. I supported it at committee. There are countless studies around the world that show exactly what Councillor Pelosi said, that by the time these projects get built and done, they're either already at capacity or over capacity. And also people over the time over the course of time where they have made adaptations for the current congestion and traffic patterns by carpooling, by traveling at off-peak hours, by taking transit or cycling, all of those things. When there seems to be added capacity on the road, they drop those options and move to a single occupant vehicle. And therefore, these projects that around the world have cost billions of dollars end up seeing at the finish point of the project, traffic moving slower than it was moving before. So this is what induced demand is. This is what we have to avoid. We're not solving any problems by building, as Councillor Pelosi so eloquently put it, a highway down the middle of our city, which is not what a livable, beautiful city is about. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Squire.
So I'm gonna try to stick to my concerns about the report. I just want to make it clear that I was more than happy to consider alternatives to widening Wonderland Road. But from what I've heard today, that's not in the cards with this motion. I think the city engineer made it clear that staff would really be looking at all other options, and certainly my colleagues who are prepared to, according to them, to make tough decisions that some of us aren't prepared to make. You know, they've made it clear that they don't want this. And you know what? At the end of the day, whatever the vote is, I will respect that. So I'm going to try to stay away from a motion, but I just want to provide my rationale. And it's primarily a concern about the report. And I felt that the report was not sufficient to move me logically to the point of saying that widening was no longer the option that needed to be taken with regard to Wonderland. There's a lot of things in the report that I reject. I reject the assumptions. A lot of the analysis and the conclusions. You know, it talks about things like induced demand as if induced demand is just a bad thing. In other words, induced demand always bad, and that's just, for me, that's just absolutely not correct. And when I looked at that, a lot of people said, you know, just because more people use a widened road doesn't make it bad policy. It can enhance economic activity, which we've seen on Wonderland Road as a wide road. It can produce short-term reduced travel time. It can indeed produce short-time emission decreases as less cars are idling on the highway. What I'm saying is, if you're going to look at these issues like induced demand, you have to look at them in totality. Similarly, we have a lot of lenses at City Hall. And it seems to me we're moving to the point of saying, if one lens and one part of one lens doesn't conform with something, it's done. It's done. And I don't think that's what these lenses are meant for. I think what we're supposed to be doing is applying all of these lenses to the various decisions we make and apply our other logical information and make a decision. I reject the idea that a lens, whatever it might be, by itself is conclusive as to whether something happens or doesn't happen. And I want to make that clear now because I think this is going to happen again in debates. People are going to say, well, it doesn't fit this part of a particular lens, so we got to cancel it or we can't do it. I don't think that's the proper approach, and it's an approach that I don't accept. You know, people talk about Wonderland Road. I think it's really important that we should have had a full look at the nature of Wonderland Road. Let's look at it. People call it, say it's a highway. It's a very busy road. And you know, somebody who was against this sent me a film and talked about the comparison of streets and roads, and said, you know, streets should have that full street approach with bike lanes, but a road is something different. A road is something that carries major amounts of traffic. It has an extended space. It should have much less egress. It should have more traffic on it. That's something that this expert was telling me was acceptable. So when one goes and says, well, we hate this Wonderland Road provides access from the extreme north end of the city to Highway 401. And by the way, it has an interchange to allow commercial and automobile traffic to access Highway 401. And I think that's an interchange that most people in the City of London advocated for. So this idea that Wonderland Road is somehow this quaint road that we have to preserve, I don't think that's where we are anymore as a large city. I also want to be, are you raising a point of order? Just getting on the list. The other point I really want to stress is just because you widen a road doesn't mean you're not going to do anything else. This idea that it's the only thing you're going to do, I reject that also. All of the things that people are talking about doing to make the road better, they can be done. And I really want to deal with the mobility master plan, you know, having sat on London Transit, you know, and I hear this again in the arguments. Well, you know, if this road gets really crowded, which it is now, by the way, people will stop using cars and they'll jump into buses and they'll jump into other methods of transportation to get across the city. There's absolutely no evidence of that, of course, in any other jurisdiction that that's happening.
30 seconds, please.
And it's not happening in the City of London. I know that well from London Transit. We have a 7.6% share. So let me put it to this way. I don't think this report is complete in satisfying the onus of showing that Wonderland shouldn't be widened. But let me be clear, my colleagues have been really clear that it's sufficient for them to make this determination. And I'll tell you one thing, I'm not going to get emotional and angry. I'm going to accept the decision that this council makes.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Hopkins, please.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I've been waiting and glad that we're here speaking to the main motion. And I guess I'd like to just start off with the conversation around congestion. And throughout my years, I've seen Wonderland go from 2 to 4, and now we're having that conversation around 6. And I can say from my own personal experience, we know widening Wonderland does not relieve congestion. I understand from my fellow colleagues that but Wonderland Road, there is congestion. It's just down the road from where I live. I use Wonderland quite often. I have learned, and I think COVID has taught us and has given us flexibility on how we use our streets. I don't use it before 9 o'clock because I know it can be very congested. I'm lucky enough to be able to use it at 9:15 where I'm able to move freely. And I think that brings to the greater conversation of how we build our city and how we move around. I'm going to wear my Ward 9 hat here. I've heard comments made around the ring road. That was a big conversation back in the 80s, and we shelved that conversation. The ring road was 401, 402 to the north, Clark Road, and 401. It had nothing to do with Wonderland. In fact, Wonderland cuts the west part of our city, and we cannot move around, and we need better plans. Widening Wonderland will not help us move in the west. It will not do that. I want to also address, I met with a representative from London Youth who did they've done a number of surveys on what the youth in London want. And in Ward 9, the youth had a number of concerns around housing affordability and diversity. But the other conversation that came loud and clear was the need for transit, not only transit, but affordable transit. So these are the conversations, these are the decisions that we're making today for the future of Londoners that want a movable city for all. Climate change. I want to address climate change here. Very easy to declare an emergency. And a lot of municipalities have done that. I know at a number of conferences that I've gone, they've come and approached and said, oh, London's declared an emergency. We're thinking of doing the same thing. And I've responded, easy to declare an emergency on climate change. What are we doing about it? And this is exactly what we're doing about it. And I want to thank staff for their work reviewing these projects. And yes, tough decisions for us to make now, but I look forward to making even more decisions, tough decisions that we need to make for a livable city for everyone here in London. I just want to thank staff and very supportive of their recommendation. Will be supporting it. And I know that moving forward with the Master Mobility Plan, we'll have further conversations with the community and having their input and how we can better address the need, not only for affordable housing, but also as we move around the city. It is going to be imperative as we grow that we do so. So thank you again to staff.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. And first, let me apologize. When I spoke earlier, I didn't rise. We're in council, so that was my faux pas. My apologies to colleagues for that. I didn't speak to this earlier. I wanted to wait until the main motion. I will be supporting this, and I want to pick up on a couple of comments that the colleagues have made. You know, we heard about the possibility of electric vehicles coming online much more quickly and reducing greenhouse emissions. Yes, they will reduce it, but building 6 lanes of roadway itself is going to cause greenhouse emissions from the production of the materials that go into the road. And even after that fact, electric vehicles are not emission free because, of course, there are emissions created in producing the electricity that charges them. They're certainly a big step forward, and the sooner the better that they arrive, but they're not going to be a single silver bullet to this climate problem that we have. I listened a lot to both Councillor Squire and Councillor Hopkins, and I appreciate their comments about transit and transit routes and transit ridership share. And I agree with Councillor Squire that in a nation like Canada, which is much different both culturally, geographically, and climate-wise than Europe, that people are not going to give up their personal automobiles because there's a little bit of a traffic congestion and jump on transit. But we've heard that there are 19 transit routes on Wonderland, and maybe one of the solutions to dealing with congestion is amalgamating and reducing some of the transit traffic into a more efficient route there. Affordable transit, I think we have. When you look at what a rider pays to ride transit in the city. And so I don't think that there's really an affordability issue with transit. In fact, I'm mindful of the fact that this council has approved student passes for secondary students at a discounted rate. Our post-secondary students get an incredible discounted rate through their deal with London Transit. We have discounts for seniors and for folks who are blind. So there are a number of ways that this council's already tackled making transit affordable. Councillor Squire mentioned the video, and I received it too, the streets versus roads. Maybe one of the solutions to Wonderland Road's traffic is to perhaps limit some of the egresses on and off the road. That's a valid point. A road that's meant to carry high volumes of traffic can't have people getting off at every single intersection and turning into neighborhoods. That's just the reality. I'm also mindful of the fact that we've approved the traffic, the TIM system, which will improve our traffic light signals and synchronization across the city. That's something that we approved through the federal funding arrangements, and staff are working on that. That will also have a role to play. I am the first to say I spend more of my time in the east than the west. I don't drive Wonderland Road frequently, but I certainly acknowledge that there are some choke points there. In fact, visiting Bostwick Arena for hockey games is sometimes difficult if it's an early start and you're still dealing with that rush hour traffic. But by the time you come home, there's no problem because the demand is at peak periods only. And to create more lanes of traffic to sit empty the majority of the hours of the day is something that I would really struggle with approving. So I think that there are alternatives to addressing Wonderland's congestion problems. That's why I was supportive of Councillor Lehman's motion. I'm also supportive of putting this EA aside and letting our staff work on those other options and focus on the ones that are going to give us the best bang for the buck. Because while the car is not going away, we also are not just going to be able to continue to expand roads endlessly. And I do agree with Councillor Ploza. on the fact that we would just be creating a highway through the city that'd be very difficult for individuals to cross, even individuals in good shape, let alone any individuals with mobility issues, to get across 6 lanes of road in a short traffic cycle.
30 seconds, please.
I appreciate the debate. I appreciate the discussion here, but I think our staff have presented a report that makes sense to me, and so I'll be supporting it and looking forward to working with them on what options might increase the traffic flow and mobility on Wonderland in the future.
Thank you. Colleagues, on the motion as amended, any other new comments? I have Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Thank you. On the main motion, Your Worship, I know there's been some talk about the climate screening tool aspects of this. A component that it was important for me as well is certainly the cost for this project. As staff have articulated, it's a $212 million project with 10 phases stretching over 12 years. In the report, they suggest that widening to 6 lanes to address traffic congestion is predicted to experience a return to congestion at the end of that. And it is challenging to me to spend that volume of money when we might end up exactly in the place that we are at the end of it. And so if staff say that there are alternatives that are possible to try to address this, I think Councillor Lehman's motion was excellent to get the focus on the challenging portions of the road. And I will be for sure looking for the alternative solutions to those portions of the road that are much more cost effective. It would have been one of the most expensive projects we ever voted on. Taking the time to see what the alternatives are and moving away from simply widening roads all the time, I think is something that I'm certainly supportive of. On the climate screening tool, I'll say there are lots of really great projects that made it through the screening tool as well. There are lots of really important transportation projects in many parts of the city that we're going to be proceeding with fully. And I think that's certainly one of the successes that we have in adding a review to the process and seeing what comes out the other end. So certainly I know this has been a very interesting and challenging debate for some, particularly in the community. I trust the judgment of our staff on this and the work that they've done leading up to and continuing on with finding solutions to some of the challenges along Wonderland Road. And I look very forward to the results of Councillor Lehman's motion as well.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Your Worship, and thanks for the good debate, everyone. I recognize there's a lot of perspectives and passions on this one. The question at hand for us has to be what we want to accomplish and what behaviors we want to reward. If we were to accept the argument that single occupant vehicles were good, then we'd want to incentivize that. And we would incentivize that by creating more space for them. But if we weren't to accept that argument, if we were to say that single occupant vehicles created a harm to the municipality in some way, then we wouldn't want to incentivize those. And so we want to take a look and say, what could we do in such a way that wouldn't create more benefits for an undesired behavior? But if we want to create more benefits for the undesired behavior, then yeah, let's widen Wonderland Road to 6 lanes because that's all you're doing. So I have some challenges with that. That comes from a whole bunch of different perspectives too, right? We have to take a look at cost. That's a huge one. I think Deputy Mayor Morgan raises the right points. We have to say, are there alternatives that are better use of our money? If we're looking at business as usual, 1970s planning, yeah, Councillor Van Meerberg gonna address the question of the ring road, 1970s planning. And widening Wonderland is 1970s planning. The challenge with ring roads is it doesn't constrain development. It becomes the center of development. And it's a huge incentivization for sprawl, which is a really poor use of land. A significant driver of climate impacts and just really bad policy. The same thing with widening Wonderland to 6 lanes. I'd like to address Councillor Squire loves to debate, and I'd love to debate him. We have a lot of fun sparring back and forth. He uses a few fallacies in his argument, and one of those is about the climate lens tool. The climate lens tool isn't either or reasoning. Climate lens helps us to say, okay, there's going to be some impacts. We've got the gender lens. We've got other lenses. Councillor Squire is quite right. What those do is help flag issues associated with those things because we've identified those as concerns that should be on our radar. And as those projects come forward to us, we would like staff to be able to flag those for us. We can accept them or not. That's our prerogative. We can accept them in part or in whole. Again, our prerogative. This isn't an either or thing. If the climate lens was applied in its absolute, you can imagine there would be a lot of stuff that wouldn't happen. In fact, we probably wouldn't support cars because those are probably one of the worst things for the climate in the city, as evidenced in the report that we had on climate impacts within the city. So that's not what the report is suggesting. The report is suggesting, let's take a look at ways of mitigating those impacts. Councillor Lehman's motion identified some opportunities to, let's try and improve where those choke points are, as you've termed them. And I think those are quite appropriate. So what's before us, and unfortunately, Wonderland Road became a bit of a lightning rod for this discussion, because what this is what the climate lens approach should be doing to how we approach our major engineering road projects. I looked at a few of them on the books, identified some of the recommendations associated with that change in perspective, and then also allows us to use that tool in a prospective basis too, as new things come forward. By rejecting this, it means that we don't even get to really look at these things anymore. It's not just about these projects, it's about the tool, it's about the concept of being able to flag these things and bring them forward and say, yeah, there might be some concerns here, because business as usual, 1970s planning, doesn't really work anymore. So I encourage you to support the motion. I really respect the points that people have made. A number of us have wards that abut Wonderland Road. In fact, Wonderland Road ends up being the boundary for a lot of our wards.
30 seconds.
So we all have a bit of a stake in this. All of Londoners have a bit of a stake in this, absolutely. We need to make the right choice. And supersizing a road, I don't really believe is the right one. And I think the climate tool as proposed by staff is quite reasonable, measured, and I think it allows us the discretion to be able to look at projects on that basis. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. So again, a lot of good points made, a bunch of conjecture as well. I wish we had supported Councillor Lehman's second motion, because I would have been content with that. I believe that there might be some places along Wonderland Road where a widening is appropriate. And at that point, it would have been fine. Here, I still think that there's some virtue in completing that EA. Of course, we may never widen a road, but we'd be able to see where it could be widened and what would the impacts for those 10 phases would be. So I guess to make things quick, what I want to do is move that the EA be completed, and then I'll look for a seconder, and if that doesn't go through or doesn't pass, then I'll support the motion as it is. But that's because I would like to see that in more detail. That would be my motion.
From my perspective, that's contrary to the motion as amended. If the motion as amended is defeated, Councillor, you'd be welcome to bring that forward.
Okay. Well, in that case, perhaps I'll just vote against the motion, and thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. Good debate, but and it's taken a lot of time, but I think it needs to. It is a serious issue, a serious way forward that needs a fulsome discussion. I was hoping for a referral on this because there has been a lot of time spent by staff, a lot of money, a lot of planning and effort has gone in the last 8+ years to arrive at this point. And I'm concerned about setting that aside without seeing the alternatives. There was mention of the cost, for sure that gets my attention. That alone would suggest, a second look, for sure. Are there alternatives? I think we're not wrong to look at that. Any big road project that involves another bridge is going to be expensive. DC charges, as we've heard, have already been put aside for that, up to 75%. This is a multi-decade project. We've got a river through our city. Cities that have rivers through it have bridges. And is this time for a bridge? I don't know. I want to see the alternatives, as I said. But I cannot go forward and just put aside the work that's been done and the money that's been spent and public consultations that have been done without seeing the alternative. I look forward to seeing what alternatives are out there, and I'm hoping that it will be a much more cost-effective way of moving traffic. What I know right now is there's congestion, serious congestion, and in the years ahead, that's only going to increase, and that has to be addressed some way, somehow. So I cannot support this motion as I do not see the alternatives. I look forward at some point for staff to bring forward the alternatives. I thank everyone for supporting the amendment to address the choke points in Wonderland, and I'm confident, I'm fairly confident that will bear fruit as providing an alternative to a big mega project. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I just want to talk about the financial side of the road widening projects and why it's so important that we use the existing road network as efficiently as we possibly can. So I'm going to use two examples. In Toronto, every 1,000 residents basically is on the hook for 5.25 lane kilometers of road. So they need to look after financially 5.25 lane kilometers. In London, that number is 9.5. So 1,000 residents in London were on the hook financially for 9.5 kilometers of road. And the reason that has happened is that we have built in a much less dense way, and we have built out the road network to accommodate that pattern of growth. And it's expensive. That's why in our infrastructure gap, roads and transportation and the structures related to transportation like bridges is the #1 contributor to the infrastructure gap. Even though over the past many number of years, every year that I've been on council, we have increased the capital lifecycle budget so we can close the gap on the infrastructure. We've increased that capital budget, lifecycle capital budget for transportation by $125 million over the 10-year period. Huge increase, and we still have over $200 million infrastructure gap. We've made a dent in a very big problem. And so we really have to avoid adding even more lane kilometers of road when we don't get a great return from them. And that's what the report is telling us, is there's not a great return for adding this lane kilometer of road in this segment. It's too expensive, and it's not in line with our climate objectives. So, when we declare a climate emergency, we're going to have to do some things differently, right? We're going to have to decide what are the things we should do differently. For me, I'm looking for things that are good for the environment and will save a bunch of money. And this is one of those things that does both things. We can avoid doing it. We can do some other things that are cheaper, that will have improvements, that have better returns. And we don't have to add all those lane kilometers, which not only the current residents are responsible for, but we're on the hook for the maintenance ongoing into the future. And that's not paid for by development charges. That's all property taxes. When we have to repave that section of road, 30 years from now, it's the future property taxpayers that are paying for it. People look at the property tax bill and say, why is it so expensive? the way we build our city is the number one thing that drives the cost of property taxes in the city. And this is a key piece of it. So if you want to save some money, suspend this environmental assessment. We can figure out some ways to improve things along this corridor that don't involve adding more lane kilometers of road.
Thank you. I have no other speakers on the list. Therefore, colleagues, we will call the motion as amended.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 9-5.
I do, Your Worship. Item 2.15 being item 19, the participation in the South London Air Monitoring Network pilot project, a great project for the south end of the city, recognizing that there is more than one odor producer in the south end, and this project will help us identify more precisely how and when those come, and it was pulled separate just due to pecuniary interest by Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Then I'll ask if there are any other comments or, excuse me, colleagues, comments or questions with respect to the item. I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-0 with one.
Thank you. Councilor Pelosi, is that it?
Yes, that concludes the 11th meeting of Civic Works. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll call on the Deputy Mayor for the 12th report of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee.
Thank you, Your Worship. There are 6 items on the agenda. There was a pecuniary interest noted on item 4.2 related to the Downtown Business Improvement Association. So I'll put everything except that item on the floor unless colleagues would like something else dealt with separately.
Does anyone wish to have any other item voted on separately? I see none. Back to you, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, then I'll put items 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 on the floor for approval.
Comments or questions? See none, we'll call the question.
I'm going to clarify because a colleague would like a different one pulled as well. So I'm going to put 1, 4, 5, and 6 on the floor. That includes everything except the downtown BIA and the receiving of the correspondence from Councillor Van Holst.
We'll call that question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, my apologies. I said it was a piece of correspondence from Councillor Van Holst. That's not correct. 4.1 is the request for delegations, of which we received the information, but so I'll put that on the floor.
Thank you very much. Comments or questions? Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And regarding this item, of course, the delegations were requested to a committee where we weren't actually making a decision that perhaps would have been better suited to the CSC committee that was looking at the decision for Councillor vaccine policy. However, I hope that when that comes up, we do entertain the delegations. The reason is I was listening to an interview with the Honorable Brian Beckford, who was the last surviving architect of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and he was saying that at the time of that creation, the reasonable limits clause that they put in there, they never would have entertained the kinds of things that have been happening recently. And so I see that there's definitely a challenge to, because of the Constitution being made to our policies and other things that have happened. So for that reason, I think it'd be well worth listening to those concerns from the residents. So I hope that at a future time we will entertain those delegations. If not setting up a PPM for it. So those are my comments. I voted against not hearing them. So I think I'll just vote against that again here this time.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? As is my custom, colleagues, if someone has left the meeting, I try to advise. Councillor Salee has left the meeting to make colleagues aware. So with no other comments or questions, we will move 4.1.
Councillor Turner. Closing the vote, the motion's passed 12-1.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Yes, the remaining item on the committee is item 3 in the council agenda, 4.2, Downtown Business Improvement Association appointment. It's the appointment of Councillor Helmer to the Downtown BIA. At the committee, Councillor Lehman declared a pecuniary interest, so I've pulled this separately.
Thanks very much. Comments or questions? Seeing them, we will call the question in just a moment.
Councillor Helmer. Closing the vote, the motion's passed 12-0 with one recused.
Thank you. Deputy,
That is all.
we'll let you sit down then. Thank you, colleagues. There are no deferred matters nor inquiries of which I've been made aware, and no emergent motions. So that'll move us to the bylaws. So colleagues, we're going to deal with at this stage bylaws 387 through 395. But we are going to exclude and deal with separately item 388 due to a conflict as declared by the deputy mayor. So with that, for first reading, introduction, first reading of bills 387 through 395, exclusive of bill 388, I'll look for a mover, please. I see Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Thank you. Let's vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-0.
Thank you. Now for second reading of bills 387 through 395, exclusive of bill 388, please. I will look for a mover. I have Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Any comments or discussion? I see none. We will call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-0.
Now, colleagues, for third reading, enactment of bills 387 through 390, 388, I'd look for a mover, please. Councillor Hillier, seconded by Councillor Turner. Thank you. We will call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-0.
Colleagues, I'll look for a mover and seconder for introduction and first reading of bill 388, please. Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Thank you. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 12-0 with one recuse.
Colleagues, for second reading of bill 388, I will look for a mover and a seconder. We'll go with Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Thank you. Any discussion? We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 12-0 with one recused.
And finally, finally, colleagues, for third reading and enactment of bill 388, I'll look for a mover, please. I see Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Thank you. Let's call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 12-0 with 1 recuse.
Well, thank you, colleagues. Before we go into closed session, just for the benefit of the public, we will be returning following dealing with a number of items in closed session and report out publicly. And I will ask the clerk to advise you now what.
Thank you. Through the chair, the matters to be dealt with in closed session are 11 matters that are outlined on the public council agenda. They include various land acquisitions, personal matters, land disposition, and matters related to litigation or potential litigation, labor relations, and matter with respect to solicitor-client privileged advice.
Thank you, clerk. So at this point now, I will look for a mover and a seconder to move into closed session. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Helmer. Thank you very much. We'll call the question.
Councillor Pelosa? Vote, the motion's passed 13-0.
Thanks. And colleagues, we will be moving over to closed session protocols, but I think it's appropriate we take a refreshment break. But if I can ask you, we've got a number of items, but we feel we'll be able to deal with those appropriately and in reasonable order. Maybe just a 10-minute refreshment pause if we could, please, as we move into closed session.